All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are going on a journey to explore maybe the most complex, most fascinating machine in the entire known universe, and it's the one sitting right between your ears. We're talking about the human mind.
Have you ever just stopped and wondered what really makes you, you? Why is your friend the life of the party while you'd much rather just have a quiet night in? Or why do some people seem to just breeze through life's challenges while others really struggle with things like anxiety? Well, believe it or not, these aren't just random late-night questions. They're actually at the very heart of what psychology is all about.
For centuries, thinking about the mind, that was a job for philosophers. But then, something big happened. A huge shift. So how did we make that leap? How did we go from just debating ideas about the mind to actually testing them? From pure philosophy to a real hard science? Well, that's exactly the story we're going to unpack today. Okay, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with what psychology even is, then see how it became a science. We'll take a quick trip through its history, check out the major schools of thought, and then see how it's used in the real world. And we'll even take a special look at its unique journey in India. Sound good? Let's dive in.
All right, so first things first, what exactly is psychology? Before we can map out this territory, we've got to know what we're actually looking at, right?
Okay, so at its core, the definition sounds pretty simple, but it is incredibly powerful. Psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. That's it. Just a few words, but they contain, well, everything. Let's break that down. So on one side, you have overt behavior. This is all the stuff we can actually see and measure. Someone talking, running, or even something like their heart rate speeding up. That's the outside stuff. But then you've got the covert mental processes. This is the hidden internal world, your thoughts, your feelings, your memories, and that's really the great challenge of psychology, right? How do you scientifically study both the seen and the unseen? So yeah, how do you study something you can't always see? I mean, you can't just guess, right? You need a specific set of tools. And honestly, it's those tools that really draw the line between modern psychology and old-school philosophy. And the most important tool in that whole toolkit? It's something called empiricism. It's actually a pretty simple idea when you boil it down. Knowledge has to come from real observation and hard evidence, not just from sitting around and thinking up theories. So instead of a philosopher just arguing that stress hurts your memory, a psychologist would say, okay, let's test that. They design an experiment, actually put people under a little stress, measure their memory, and see what the data says. The motto is, we don't just guess, we test.
And this right here, this is the playbook they follow. It's the good old scientific method, but adapted specifically for studying the mind. You see how it works? You start with a problem. You come up with a testable guess. We call that a hypothesis. Then you run your experiment or observation, you crunch the numbers, and you draw a conclusion. The key is that it's all based on evidence, not just someone's opinion.
And to do these studies, psychologists have a whole range of methods. Sometimes they'll use a descriptive method, like doing a super in-depth case study on just one person to get a really detailed picture. Other times, they'll run a full-blown experiment to see if one thing actually causes another. And then there are correlational studies where they measure the relationship between two things, like, say, how much you sleep and what your grades are. That's a big one because it can show you there's a connection, but, and this is key, it doesn't prove one causes the other. It's all about picking the right tool for the right question.
Okay, so we've got the tools, but who were the first people to actually use them? Who were the first true explorers of the mind? It's funny, psychology has this super long philosophical past, but a really short scientific history. So let's meet the pioneers who drew the very first scientific maps of our inner world.
And this timeline really shows you that journey perfectly. For, centuries, you had brilliant thinkers like Plato and Aristotle just debating the nature of the mind and the soul. But then, 1879, that was the game changer. That's when a guy named Wilhelm Wundt opened the first ever psychology lab in Germany. And boom, that's the official birth of psychology as a science. Things moved fast after that. William James published his massive foundational textbook, and the American Psychological Association, or APA, was formed, making it all official. Now, once the field was officially a thing, it just exploded. All of these different ideas started popping up. The early psychologists definitely did not agree on the best way to map the mind, and this led to a bunch of different, often competing schools of thought, with each one having its own unique map and its own set of rules. And these early schools had some wildly different ideas. You had the structuralists, who were like chemists, trying to break the mind down into its tiniest basic parts.
Then the functionalists came along and said, whoa, wait a minute, forget the parts, what does the mind do? What's its purpose? Then you had Freud's psychoanalysis, diving deep into the unconscious mind. And the behaviorists, they said forget all that internal stuff, let's only study what we can actually see. And then the Gestalt folks chimed in, saying the whole experience is way more important than any of its individual parts.
And as time went on, the focus kept shifting. Humanistic psychology came along and put the spotlight on free will and our potential for growth. Then the cognitive revolution was a huge deal. It brought the focus right back to our internal mental processes, like memory and thinking. And today, things are even more complex. We look at everything, from our biology and genetics to our culture and evolutionary past, to understand how all these different layers work together to make us who we are.
So what happened to all those old schools of thought? Well, they didn't just disappear. They kind of evolved and merged, and their ideas helped create all the specialized fields of psychology that we have today. So let's take a look at how those old historical maps are guiding today's explorers in our modern world.
Okay, this is where the rubber really meets the road. We're talking about things like clinical psychology, where professionals are on the front lines, helping people with mental health. You've got developmental psychology, which maps our entire journey from the day we're born to our final years. Social psychologists study fascinating stuff, like why we act so differently in a crowd versus when we're alone. And it doesn't stop there. It applies everywhere, from making workplaces better to giving crucial insights in a courtroom.
Now, for a minute, let's zoom in on a very specific journey. You see, while a lot of this early history we've been talking about was centered in Europe and America, psychology also carved out its own really unique path right here in India.
So the story of formal psychology in India really begins in 1916, when the first department was set up at the University of Calcutta. Pioneers like Gurinder Shekhar Bose were crucial in getting the field off the ground, which eventually led to the Indian Psychological Association. A really big moment came in 1974 with the establishment of NIMHANS, which is now a world-class institute for mental health. And today what's really exciting is the growth of what's called indigenous psychology, which is all about taking these global ideas and adapting them so they make sense and work within the unique cultural and social context of India.
You know, this image of a tree is actually a perfect way to wrap all of this up. Think of psychology like a massive tree. Its roots, they go way down deep into philosophy. The trunk is the strong, solid core of science that gives it all structure. The big branches reaching out in different directions, those are the great schools of thought, each one trying to find the light. And all the leaves? Well, those are the thousands of modern applications that touch our lives in countless ways every single day.
Ultimately, I think the American Psychological Association put it best. They said psychology embraces all aspects of the human experience. And it's so true. It's a tool that helps us understand everything, from the microscopic firing of a single brain cell all the way up to the massive, complex dynamics of entire nations.
So, there you have it. We've laid out the map. But you know, a map is really just the beginning of the adventure, isn't it? The real question is for you. Now that you've seen this incredible landscape of the human mind, what part of it are you going to explore first?